Hi there, Allison here with another Cab Franc du jour. Today's wine is taking us to Central Virginia, and we're looking at the Early Mountain 2019 Quaker Run Vineyard Cabernet Franc. Early Mountain's story begins in 2005, with their first vineyards being established by Jess and Sharon Sweeley. In 2010, the property was purchased by Jean and Steve Case, and the winery officially opened its doors in 2012. Their winemaker, Maya Hood-White, is a California native and studied at UC Davis, and she's been with Early Mountain since 2014. And she assumed the role of assistant winemaker in 2017, and as of 2022, Maya is now head winemaker at the winery. Early Mountain has around 55 acres of vineyards planted across 2 vineyard sites, and of that, 8.6 acres are planted with Cabernet Franc. That's around 3.5 hectares. In addition to their own plantings of Cabernet Franc, they are working with some growers for select bottlings of Cabernet Franc, such as their Shenandoah Springs bottling. And while Early Mountain is a relatively new winery on the Virginia wine scene, they have quickly established themselves as a leading producer in the state. And the winery is a huge proponent of Cabernet Franc. In addition to their single varietal bottlings of Cabernet Franc, the Grape makes its way into several other wines, including their sparkling rosé, still rosé, and other red blends. And from the 2019 vintage alone, they released 5 single varietal Cabernet Francs. And if that isn't an indication as to how much they love this grape variety, then I don't know what is. I haven't had much of an opportunity to talk about the Virginia wine scene, so let me take some time to summarize to the best of my ability the key elements that influence the growing environment here. First and foremost, there are grapes grown for winemaking in nearly all corners of the state, and Virginia is a fair size. At its widest point, it stretches about 600 kilometers, that's about 400 miles from east to west. And at its widest point from north to south, it stretches about 300 kilometers, or about 180 miles from north to south. The state can be divided into 10 principal growing regions, which are home to 8 official AVAs. And the growing regions are between 36 degrees north latitude and 39 degrees north latitude, which if we drew a line over to Europe, the state of Virginia would cover an area roughly the size of southern Portugal and southwestern Spain. So by virtue of the fact that we're dealing with a rather large area here, there will be a lot of variability in terms of the regional microclimates as well as the microclimate from vineyard to vineyard. But there are some generalizations that we can make. Virginia's eastern and western borders are defined by 2 geographical features that really influence the growing environment of the grape growing regions. In the east, we have the Atlantic Ocean, and in the west, we have the Appalachian Mountains, more specifically the Blue Ridge Mountains. And our proximity to the Atlantic Ocean here means that this is the main influence in terms of the climate of the viticultural areas. And this means that Virginia experiences higher precipitation and higher humidity as well. Precipitation ranges from around 1,000 to 1,200 millimeters annually. And the precipitation will fall consistently at regular intervals throughout the year. The summers are warm to hot, and they do experience higher humidity as well. In general, the grape growing environment would be characterized as moderate maritime, increasing in continentality as we move westward, with a slightly cooler conditions and slightly drier conditions as you move inland. Now, because of this higher precipitation and higher humidity, these are certainly limiting factors as to what grape varieties will be successful here. Now, as we move west across the state, we find a greater impact of the Blue Ridge Mountains. And these mountains separate central Virginia, this area that is geographically known as Piedmont, which is on the eastern side of the Blue Ridge Mountains, from the valley and ridge zones and the Appalachian zones, which are on the western side of the Blue Ridge Mountains. And as we move westward, this Blue Ridge mountain range influences elevation, particularly in the central part of Virginia and the western part of Virginia. So in these areas, we find vineyards at elevation from around 100 meters above sea level up to around 425 meters above sea level, with the majority of vineyards hovering roughly between 150 and 275 meters above sea level. Also, as we move west and into these foothills, this is where we start to see and experience a more undulating topography. And this impacts vineyard aspects, so the exposures in the vineyard. So we will have vineyards with any number of exposures, and this will influence the amount of sunshine a vineyard will receive. And we also find vineyards at different slopes, different gradual slopes, steeper slopes. And this slope is important because the slope impacts drainage. So depending on the slope you have here, that will also determine the success of what grape variety will do well in that particular site. Now, in terms of soils, Virginia is extremely geologically diverse. We literally find every soil imaginable here, from alluvial and colluvium. We also find limestones, sandstones, shales, granite, gneiss, and literally everything in between. Generally speaking, there are 4 broad groups of soils in the state. In the east, at lower elevations, we find clays and silts that are part of the coastal plain. And then as we move west into the central region here, this region called Piedmont, this is where we find metamorphic soils predominantly, so gneiss, shales, schists, as well as slates. And then there's pockets of igneous, or soils that are of volcanic origin, like granites. And then there's this narrow band of soils that follows the Blue Ridge Mountains. This is where we find ancient sandstones, granites, greenstones, and gneiss. And then on the western side of the Blue Ridge Mountains, we find sandstones, shales, limestones, and dolostones. Now, all of this is to say that with the variety of elevations, aspects, slopes, and soils that we find in the state of Virginia, site selection becomes very critical as to what grape variety will work well where. And this is part of the reason why there are over 28 different grape varieties planted across the state. Currently in the state of Virginia, there's around 4,300 acres under vine. That's about 1,700 hectares. And these are concentrated in the central Virginia and the northern Virginia growing regions. And the number 1 planted grape variety in the state is, it's Cabernet Franc. In 2021, Cabernet Franc surpassed Chardonnay as the number 1 planted grape variety in the state. And there's 643 acres planted. That's around 260 hectares of Cabernet Franc planted in Virginia. And this represents around 15% of the area under vine in the state. Now, I can see a lot of reasons why Cabernet Franc would be happy here. Cab Franc has seemed to adapted well and thrives in these moderate, maritime, kind of moist environments, as we've seen in places like Bordeaux and Rouligny and even Uruguay. But the summers can get a little warm here for Cabernet Franc, so site selection becomes critical, and we got to find that Goldilocks zone where it's warm but not too hot. We need good exposure in terms of sunshine to help with minimizing the pyrazines, and we also need soils that are deeper, well-draining, that balance drainage, moisture retention capacity, as well as vigor. So drilling down to today's wine and where exactly we are in Virginia, Early Mountains Quaker Run Vineyard is located about 14 miles, that's about 22 kilometers north of the winery. And we're situated here at the northern end, the northern edge of the central Virginia growing region. We're in Madison County. We're about 30 miles or about 48 kilometers northeast of the city of Charlottesville. And we're on the eastern side of the Blue Ridge Mountains. So we are quite a ways inland from the Atlantic Ocean. We're in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. So we're at elevation here. We're at an elevation of around 290 meters above sea level. That's about 950 feet. And this elevation gives us a wider diurnal range in temperatures, so the evenings will be cooler. They'll offset those warmer daytime temperatures, and this is good for helping to slow down ripening, extend the growing season. This helps with phenolic development. The cooler night times will also help to preserve acidities. And the vineyard is on a south-facing slope of a moderate grade, about 20% slope. And the south-facing exposure is good for helping with the sun exposure during the latter stages of the ripening phase. This is good for minimizing pyrazines. And then, of course, this slope, this 20% grade, is going to be great for drainage as well. Now, in terms of soils, we are in that part of the state where we find that narrow band of soils that follows the Blue Ridge Mountains. So because of the topography here and this undulating nature of these foothills, there's a lot of variability. And Maya shared with me that the soils in this site are of colluvial origin, or they're colluvial soils, I should say. And these are soils that are derived through erosion. And they're part of a soil series called Unison, and these are sandy clay loam soils, and they are deep, well draining, and they have a high rock and mineral diversity. So these rocks that are found in the site are a combination of what we would typically find at higher elevations, so sandstones, shales, and limestones. This site was planted in 2015, and there's 1.25 hectares of Cabernet Franc planted here. That's around 3 or so acres. And they're working with clones 214 and 327. Those are the the Loire and Bordeaux clones, respectively. And in a short period of time, Maya said to me that just in this short period of time, Cabernet Franc has really adapted well to this vineyard site and is starting to show great promise. And it's already starting to show some really special characteristics in the finished wine. And as a result, they've actually decided to pull out some of the other varieties that were initially planted here in favor of planting more Cabernet Franc. Well, from a winemaking perspective, the fruit for this wine was harvested in 2 separate picks, and the fermentation is 20% whole cluster, the rest is destemmed, and the fermentation is in stainless steel, and the total time on skins is around 3 to 4 weeks, and they do very little by way of extractive techniques. Maya said that they take a bit more of a Burgundian hand with regards to their red wine program, in particular with Cabernet Franc. And then in terms of the aging, they're working with larger, mostly neutral French oak barrels. These are 500 to 1,000 liter French oak barrels, and the aging is for about 16 months before the wine is bottled. So let's get into this wine. So the wine has a really nice aromatic profile to it. It's got some nice lift. There's a lot of clarity here and a lot of purity. And then in terms of the fruit profile, this leans a little bit more in the red fruit spectrum, a little bit tartar, like there's something instantly, you can kind of smell the acidity in the wine. So I'm getting a mix of these sweet tart fruits, things like raspberries. There's a little bit of like a lingonberry note. There's a little bit of a cherry note, almost like a sour cherry note as well. And there's a little tinge of a blue fruited note on the nose too. And then in terms of the herbal undertones, this wine leans a little bit more on the savory side, but it's by no means green. It's got this beautiful herbal underpinning. I often use the term wispy herbs, which some people may not understand, but I mean softer herbs, like things like tarragon, sage. That's what I'm getting in this wine. There's also a gorgeous perfume here, floral perfume. And I wish I knew more about flowers and horticulture because it's not the typical things that I often find in Cabernet Franc, like violets and roses and peony and stuff like that. There's something else going on here that's a bit exotic, which I quite like. And there's a lovely, as I said, there's a lovely purity to the fruit profile on the nose, which is really nice. On the palate, those same fruits come through bang on as they did on the nose. They lean a little bit more blue on the palate, like there's a little wild blueberry note, which is quite nice. There's a great spice profile. It's not super spicy, I would say, but there is a nice underlying spice component, which for me is coming through really delicately, almost like a cardamom note. The acidity is really juicy, energetic. There's a persistence to the acidity, like you feel the acidity instantly in the mouth, and it really just carries the wine all the way through to the finish. In terms of the tannins are super finely woven, really fine knit tannins, fine grain tannins. And there's a moderate amount of tannin here, which I like. There's some nice structure here that with the acidity, I think we'll set this wine up for a nice aging period, and it should age gracefully, I think. The tannins have a beautiful velvety texture. There's a little bit of a chalkiness on the finish as well. Yeah, this wine is really lovely. It's got a medium body. There's a good kind of spherical nature to the middle palate. Like it literally feels like there's kind of like a ball in my mouth. Like it's got this nice roundness in the middle palate, which I quite like. And sometimes Cabernet Franc can lack a little bit in the middle, but this has this beautiful fruit profile. There's the great integrity in the middle palate, great density there, and concentration, which I think is really important to the structure of this wine. And overall, you know, you do sense the wine that is quite serious. There's a thoughtfulness. You sense that the wine was really thought through as well. It's very careful in that way. It has this very methodical kind of feel to it, but at the same time, it's quite approachable, which Cabernet Franc tends to be. And I do like the balance here. You know, it's got great balance in terms of the acidity, the tannin, the fruit. The alcohol is beautifully in check as well. And I'm just loving how all the elements are coming together. And this is the first time I have had an early mountain Cabernet Franc, and I gotta say, I am impressed. Clearly, the team, the viticultural team, the winemaking team, Maya, everybody seems to really get this grape variety. And I don't know, when I find a place that really absolutely truly loves Cabernet Franc, it comes through in the glass. Like, when you get this grape, it shines in the glass, because you can sense that person's passion for the grape variety really comes through. And I'm excited to try more. Maya said that Cabernet Franc, she believes that Cabernet Franc is really expressive of sight, and I agree with her as well. And they're already starting to see some really cool examples of Cabernet Franc coming from not only their own vineyards, but some of the other vineyard sites that they're working with as well. And this is going to be a winery that I am going to continue to follow closely with regards to their work with Cabernet Franc. And yeah. I hope, you know, I don't get access to too many Cabernet Francs from Virginia. I'm going to try and do better going forward to find more of these wines and talk about the nuances of this region. But if you have a favorite Cabernet Franc from the state of Virginia, please let me know what it is in the comments below. I need to track these wines down. So please let me know what it is in the comments below. And of course, as always, I will be back again soon with another wine. Cheers.